Hello everybody and welcome to another Doctor Who review. This time I'm reviewing a Fifth Doctor story and the second story of the Guardian Trilogy. It's Terminus. As always, I have with me the television companion for the classic TV stories. Let's see what the plot synopsis is for this story. The TARDIS attaches itself to a space liner after Turlough, still under the Black Guardian's influence, damages its controls. The Doctor and Nyssa meet two space pirates, Kari and Olvia, who have come on board the liner in search of plunder, while Tegan and Turlough get lost in the infrastructure. The liner docks with what appears to be a Hulk floating in space. This is Terminus, which claims to offer a cure for Lazar disease. It is crewed by a group of armoured slave workers, the Veneer, while the cure is administered by a huge dog-like creature known as the Garm. Nyssa, who has contracted the disease from sufferers transported aboard the liner, discovers that the cure, involving exposure to radiation, does actually work. The Doctor and Carrie, meanwhile, learn that the ship, once capable of time travel, was responsible for the creation of the universe when an injection of fuel from one of its engines caused the Big Bang. Aided by Kari and the Garm, the Doctor is able to disconnect a still active but damaged engine that's on the point of exploding, something that could result in the universe's destruction. So there we go, the fourth story of Season 20, Terminus, starring Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, Sarah Sutton as Nyssa, Janet Fielding as Tegan, and Mark Strickson as Turlough. So I'm going to start with the characters, and then I'll go through some of the bits I like and some of the bits I don't like of this story. So we start with the Doctor, the Fifth Doctor, Peter Davison. This theme of the Fifth Doctor being a victim of circumstance is apparent in this story too. However, he seems a bit more lost. I think this is interesting because Mordred and Undead focused on the characterization of Turlough and Tegan getting involved with the Brigadier. Terminus seems to focus on the characterization of Turlough a little bit, but mostly on Nyssa and her adventure and how she's getting on. So it's like compensation for Nyssa being in the sidelines of the previous story. So the Fifth Doctor doesn't really get much to do and was part of circumstance again. The intelligence of the Doctor does shine through with the resolution to fix the computer that's about to eject the fuel from the engine and causing potentially a destruction of the universe. Well, he believes strongly is going to cause the destruction of the universe. And what Peter Davison's given is acted very well. I think it's very nicely done. But I don't know whether this season's writing is just kind of a little bit flim-flam at times, a bit flimsy, because it just doesn't seem to enthrall me. I mean, the idea of the story is interesting, but it's just the writing of the characters. Peter Davison carries it through his characterization of the Doctor more than actually what's written for the Doctor. And he's just breathlessly flying about the ship and Terminus, trying to figure things out. The Doctor does realise there's something not quite right with the way Terminus is in the centre of the universe and everything else, and he notices that time travel, and he kind of puts two and two together from there. So the intelligence of the Doctor's there, but the Doctor doesn't really do too much here. The story doesn't focus on the Doctor, it focuses on the companions and other characters within the story. But what Pete Davison gets, as always, doesn't put a foot wrong, and is actually quite well realised in this episode, in this story. We then have Nyssa, played by Sarah Sutton. I think the focus of this story, to be fair, was Nyssa's departure. This is the last story that Sarah Sutton appears in as Nyssa. She hasn't returned to the television series so far, but she is an 80s companion. It's very possible the Doctor might bump into her sometime in the future. Big Finish has expanded on that, but the television series hasn't revisited Nyssa so far. It's a good performance from Sarah Sutton. I think she's given quite a bit to do, but she's a bit Perils of Pauline at some points because she's ill, because she's contracted Lazarus. She's kind of drifted away with some of the in the middle of the story. She's kind of part of events. She doesn't really get much to do. She tries to protest but doesn't get anywhere. It's interesting how it works. I think overall this is Nyssa's story, really. She uses her intelligence and her knowledge to understand about the Lazarus disease and the radiation that cures her. She realizes it will work, but it's hit and miss. And with a bit of refinement, she could do good work here. And she actually leaves for a purpose, which is nice. She didn't just go, I found somebody I fell in love with, I'm going to say bye-bye. She left for a purpose. And even though the ending is a bit last minute, she just makes a decision, decides to leave. It's well realised. It's not badly performed by any of the cast members at that point, and I think it works quite well. Janet Fielding's Tegan, on the other hand, Tegan gets the sideline that Nyssa did last time. She's kind of... the forceful personality of Tegan is there, and the relationship is developing between her and Turlough, that push and pull. So because obviously they're going to be the continuing companions, that was developed quite a bit here. And they do bounce off each other quite well. She is quite sceptical of Turlough still, but is starting to warm to him, even though he's still scheming in the background. It's actually quite a nice way it's been produced and created here, and I quite like the way that Janet Fielding portrays Tegan in this story. I think it's really well realised. But there's not much for Tegan to do. She is caught up in events. In fact, they all are, really. It's a bit of a disappointment. There's no real action to it. They're just part of the adventure, and there's no real purpose to it, which is a little bit disappointing. But Janet Fielding does well with what she gets. We are seeing a kind of slightly softer side with Tegan at the moment, which I quite like. And overall, it was a decent performance. Mark Strickson with Turlough. The character of Turlough is a little bit more dialed down this time, the characterization development, but he's still struggling to break through the Guardian, but the Guardian's got this grip with him, which is really interesting and is driving some of the plot line again. It's interesting how that works. Turlough's character is becoming a bit more flat, and it starts in this story. He's still scheming a little bit. At the beginning, it's nice with the little scheming he has with Tegan, and him trying to open the TARDIS panel and affect the TARDIS as he does, and the fact that the Guardian's still helping him to get back to the TARDIS and all that. It's interesting how that's working. However, it's not as good a characterization for Turlough this time round as it was in the last story. But Mark Strickson, you believe the character of Turlough, and you believe it because of Mark Strickson and the way he performs it, and it's really well done in that respect. We then have Valentine Dial playing the Black Guardian. Again, more of a background big bad, bit menacing, trying to control Turlough and some of the events. And this thing about him wanting to kill the Doctor is starting to grate a little bit here. So it's interesting how his control of Turlough is still there. The way that he's trying to get his power on Turlough doesn't seem to sit right with me. He's kind of like, oh, I'll use the crystal, which he's repaired itself from last time, and I'll let it explode and injure Turlough. And it's kind of like, okay, that was a pointless thing. If you want to cause annoyance, there's other ways of punishing him, and these sort of things don't seem to make sense to me. It's a bit strange and a bit weird. The menace is still there with Black Guardian, and Valentine Dial does very well and plays it very well, and it's a great character here. But again, it's the overarching thread, but it doesn't fully work in the character this time, and it just seems like Turlough is just being controlled by a maniac. There's not really any purpose with the Black Guardian this time round, and that's difficult trying to write that into a story which is completely self-contained with the Lazarus ship and everything else, and trying to bring in this subplot line. It kind of grates a little bit, and the character is dented because of that. We then have the guest cast. We have Kari, played by Lisa Goddard. An interesting characterization. Supposed to be a bounty hunter, a pirate going in to try and loot the ship. They realise it's a Lazarus ship. It's played okay. She basically teams up with the Doctor for most of the second half of the story. And the character works quite well. We have Olvia, played by Dominic Gard. I don't know whether they wanted Olvia to become potentially the love interest to Nyssa. It doesn't come across like that, but he's a slightly naive, younger space pirate. The nice little plot point I like about that is the fact that his sister has contracted Lazarus and died from Lazarus disease. So it's interesting seeing that and that plot line. But he's kind of creeping around, trying to find Nyssa and trying to save the day and be the small hero. and he doesn't get much more to do, but what Dominic Guard does get works quite well. Two more, we've got Andrew Burt, who plays Valgard, one of the slave workers on Terminus. He plays what he gets fine, but the characterization turning from someone who wants to overthrow the current leadership to someone who is just menacing and nasty, and then turns when he realizes that there's a chance to change things, when the doctor suggests that they can have this chemical that they need to survive. It's kind of like Deep Space Nine's Ketracel White. It's kind of like a drug that keeps them alive. Probably doesn't need to keep them alive, but that's just the different thing. But it's biologically part of them to enslave them. And the fact that he wants to take control, and that kind of purpose is kind of superseded when the doctor says, "Oh, look, I can help you. I can make this chemical. We can make this chemical for you," and this desires to help them. It's interesting, but the character doesn't come off there because he comes across as a bit of a gruff annoyance, and then he becomes more helpful. And I don't get the character. It's played great, but I don't get the character. The only other one I want to make a mention for is R.J. Bell playing the Garm. It's interesting. The Garm is again a slave. He's under control with this device that the guards use and the slave workers use to command him to help take lasers away to cure them with the radiation situation. It's an interesting design. It's an interesting characterization. This creature who can help, has the strength enough to turn the lever back when they need to turn the lever back for reversing the engine from injecting its fuel. It's an interesting characterization, and considering it's supposed to be a big lumbering creature that's seen as the monster, but it's got a kind heart, and I like the way the Garm is portrayed, and R.J. Bell plays it fine. I don't have a problem with it. Okay, the good bits. I like the idea of the laser ship and Terminus and the disease of Lazar's disease. It's obviously a parody of leprosy or some sort of bubonic plague, and the idea of a society commoditizing it and making it such a business transaction is so 80s in its thinking, so now in its thinking in some respects. That idea I quite like. I quite like the way that's portrayed and written. I think the budgetary constraints of Doctor Who kind of doesn't realise it as well as it could do. I like the idea of the disease that's very infectious, as Nyssa finds out, and can cause, complete debilitation and kill people. It's an interesting concept, and a nice parable that's written here about the enslavement as well that happens with the workers. It's on Terminus. It's interesting how that all works out. Also, the time travel sci-fi element. This is where the sci-fi element really comes in. Is the time travel, the fact the ship ejected fuel, which created the Big Bang, and could eject the fuel, the second engine, which could create the destruction of the universe. Very Doctor Who-y, very timey-wimey sci-fi. It works for me. I quite like the way that comes across. It's an interesting setup. The plotline doesn't fully engage me. I don't know whether it's the direction or whether it's the production itself or whether it's just a bit too long for the story, because effectively they have to sideline two of the TARDIS team, which is always a problem when it comes to three people in the TARDIS. And I would have thought that John Nathan Turner would have recognised that from season 19. Because modern action-based adventure in Doctor Who, you can really do it with two companions at most. You couldn't do it with much more because effectively you got two plot lines. So it's interesting how that always works. But Tegan and Turlough being sidelined to allow Nyssa to breathe is a nice way of writing it, and it does kind of tie in with the way they dealt with the plot lines there, because Tegan and Turlough are basically an infrastructure going through tunnels for 2 episodes. It's an interesting writing style, but it does mean that the story needs to have more in it than it actually needs. It could be cut back with some of the elements if you took 2 of the characters away. If it was just if it was the case that Tegan and Turlough actually stayed in the TARDIS as they were told to and didn't go out exploring, and Turlough wasn't doing his machinations with Black Guardian, It very much would be a story of Nyssa and the Doctor with the two bounty hunters and the situation around everything else. It would have worked better in that respect. So I think there was too many characters and too many plot lines, which confused it a little bit for me and kind of dented my enjoyment. But the concept's nice. I like the way the concept works. And I think overall it's a great writing and story in that respect. Steve Gallagher has actually done a decent job with this in regards to writing it. And it's a nice premise to go with. We then have the direction by Mary Ridge. Mary Ridge has done a decent direction. It's a bit of single camera work because it's quite obvious to try and get some sort of movement in there. She's used single camera work. Logistically, it looks like they couldn't get the studio cameras into the confined spaces, so they've used film, although I do believe it's filmed in the studio. It's just had to use film cameras because technically they couldn't get that low down with the cameras to do the filming in the tunnels. I don't think they're going to be in a location. I think it is all studio-based. They just had to film down in the lower bits under the rostrum, which effectively they've used for setting. They've gone underneath the rostrum. It's interesting. It's an interesting setup, and I like the way the filming is done. I think the set is nicely lit. I think they are reusing sets somewhere down the line. I can see that quite obviously. Possibly maybe reusing some sets from, maybe not Arc of Infinity, but one of the early stories. They reused Adric's bedroom set. They have reutilized Nyssa's bedroom with a couple of changes. I like the way that the sets are being redressed and reused here, and I think the lighting being toned down actually makes a difference. So it's an interesting direction, an interesting concept. The music by Roger Lim, very much his style. The stabs, the synth points and the leitmotifs that are in there are very much what he did in Arc of Infinity, very much the same music style. I do like the fact that he's kept the leitmotif of the Black Guardian that was created by Paddy Kingsland for the previous story, and Roger Lim, of course, did the music for Keeper of Traken, so he's used Nyssa's theme when she leaves, which is really a nice callback, and when she recovers from the Lazarus disease in the treatment room, that's very nice to see. And overall, it punctuates the story. It does work. It doesn't interfere too much. It only comes in when it needs to. There isn't really any proper musical tracks apart from the two I mentioned. They're more used like musical cues overall. And it's a nice way of punctuating it, but very 80s, the way it's all been used with The Sims. But still nice all the same. Overall, it's an okay story. It's a bit more take your brain out than Mordrin was. It's not completely. You still need to follow the plot a bit. It's a little bit dragging again. I think maybe they're not quite getting the writers to be able to do a four-parter in this time, because the previous one had a similar issue, Mordor Undead. However, I was swithering between whether it's one rating or the other, but I have actually gone more conservative, and I'm giving this a rating of 3 TARDISes out of 5. Okay, let's see how that story stacks up with the rest of the Fifth Doctor era so far, and how that story stacks up with the rest of the TV stories I've reviewed so far as well. Out of the 9 Peter Davison stories that I've reviewed so far, Terminus sits in with 3 others: Arc of Infinity, Fort of Doomsday, and Mordrin Undead with 3 TARDISes out of 5. At the top is Kays Vandrazani with 4.5 TARDISes out of 5. Overall, there are still 2 stories with 2.5 TARDISes out of 5. They are Time Lash and Sleep No More. And at the top, including the Kays of Vandrazani at 4.5 TARDISes out of 5, we have the Happiness Patrol, Inferno, The Day of the Doctor, The Tomb of the Cybermen, Dalek, and The End of Time. That's it from me. Thanks guys for watching this Doctor Who review. What did you think about Terminus? Leave a comment down below. Did you like it? Leave a comment down below. Did you not like it? Leave a comment down below. And if you like this video, please like it, share it with the hashtag teamstructor, and if you like the channel as a whole, hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you know when a new video comes out. General, new video every Sunday at 4 PM GMT, which is the case this time. Next Sunday, I review the last of the Guardian Trilogy and what people redeem possibly is the best of the stories, Enlightenment. I will see you then, but until next time, guys, thank you very much for watching as always, and you know what? I'll see you later.